Hello and welcome to Elevate 2020 session on decoupling the PowerBuilder IDE and Runtime in PowerBuilder 2019 revision number 3. Hi, I'm Chris Pollock. I'm the Director of Developer Relations here at Appeon. I joined Appeon in 2016, just 1 month after Appeon acquired the PowerBuilder product from SAP. In 1991, I had my own consulting company, Software Tool & Die, which consulted to many Canadian and even US government mega projects. When I say mega projects, I'm talking about databases in the terabytes and number of concurrent PowerBuilder users over 10,000. In 1999, I started with PowerBuilder Alpha 0.8. Prior to that, I also worked at Culinet Database Systems with Mr. Dave Litwack, who is the designer of PowerBuilder itself, and Mr. Kim Sheffield, who's the author and designer of the data window object. So I have a lot of expertise, of course, with PowerBuilder, the operating systems, database engines, etc. You can reach me here at Appeon, or you can use the LinkedIn URL address that you see here. So let's have a look at the agenda. First, we'll have a look at the decoupling benefits, changes and impacts, the IDE model and runtime model changes, the installation changes, migration considerations and tips, which I'll try and provide as we go through this entire presentation, supporting utility changes, and of course the new PowerClient feature. Now, an in-depth presentation is going to be held here at Elevate 2020. We're just going to have a look at the runtime aspect in this particular presentation. So first of all, the benefits. This will allow Appeon Engineering to deliver more frequent and IDE and runtime releases. PowerBuilder developers can compile, debug, and execute applications with various PowerBuilder runtimes from one version of the IDE. This will allow PowerBuilder developers to quickly update their IDE without affecting production environments. And runtime version support for PowerBuilder utilities, OrcaScript, PowerBuilder external compiler, even the PowerBuilder packager, for example, are provided in this release. The possibility in the future for a 64-bit runtime debugging from the PowerBuilder IDE. Notice that this will come after PowerBuilder 2019 revision 3. And it's going to provide automatic runtime deployment via the PowerClient tool. Again, the details of this will be in the PowerClient session. However, in this session, we're going to have a look at the runtime aspect only. So product releases before decoupling, before revision number 3. Product builds take 1 to 2 days for Appeon Engineering. Our Appeon Quality Assurance team takes 4 to 6 weeks to do a QA cycle. And again, a 4 to 6 week cycle for the runtime. Because they're tightly coupled, enhancing the IDE was slowed down by the dependency on the runtime. After decoupling, product builds will take a few hours. 1 week for the quality assurance team to go through the IDE checks. And then 3 to 4 weeks is the estimate for the quality assurance team for the runtime. So therefore, enhancements to the IDE and runtime can now be sent to you separately. So let's have a look at this decoupling. Of course, it starts in 2019 revision number 3. Notice that the supporting runtime is the long-term edition, R3 LTS. The decoupled runtime will continue from this point on, from 2019 all the way through 2022 and beyond. For the supported runtimes, notice that's dependent on the IDE. So if we look at 2019, it only supports 2019 R3 runtime. However, if we look at the middle slice, PowerBuilder IDE 2022, you'll notice that that IDE will support the runtimes 2019 revision 3, 2021, and 2022. Notice the restrictions are on the actual IDE release itself. For example, you can't use a runtime higher than 2022 if you're looking at 22 revision 2, 3, or 2023. So first of all, the IDE updates and fixes. Here you see an application developer on the left-hand side in the black silhouette, and also the corresponding runtime. The application developer is going to compile an application and deploy that application and the runtime into production. What happens, however, if there's a problem with the IDE that is not affected by the runtime? Well, now you'll be able to actually update the IDE separately. So here, for example, maintenance release number 1 has been applied only to the IDE. The runtime is left the same, and therefore the production environment can continue on. Let's say, for example, it's just a bug in a selection on a property screen for a drop-down list that's not entirely comprehensive. So now we can update the IDE. The runtime stays unchanged, and therefore you don't have to redeploy. In prior releases, if you wanted to upgrade the IDE, you also had to take the new runtime because they were tightly coupled. So let's have a look at runtime update control. Again, we have the developer and the application on the base 2019 revision number 3. Appeon is now giving you a piece of maintenance. We're going to apply maintenance release number 1 just to the runtime, and we can redeploy that maintenance release runtime also into production. Notice that the IDE is left unchanged. In prior releases, we'd have to basically uninstall the old 2019 maintenance release number 1 to get the old IDE back again. However, that's no longer required. And again, if there's something goes wrong with the runtime, we can remove it here from the development environment and then just percolate that change over to production. Everything's rolled back without changing again, uninstalling and reinstalling the complete PowerBuilder IDE maintenance release. So that gives us easy updates, rollbacks of runtime updates without having to completely uninstall, reconfigure, and reload the PowerBuilder IDE. What happens if you have multiple versions? Here we have the base revision number 3 for application number 1 and application number 2. A maintenance release comes out, and we pick up the new runtime, maintenance release number 1. Notice we can then push that over to production just for application number 2. Application number 1 doesn't use that particular PowerBuilder feature maintenance release number 1 was fixing, so we can leave that runtime alone in the production environment. So again, a single version of the IDE can maintain applications of different runtime versions. And of course, if you reverse this, something goes wrong with application number 2, the new runtime, we can easily revert the development environment, remove maintenance release number 1, and revert application number 2 back to the base revision number 3 runtime. So again, rollbacks are much easier to do. So let's have a look at the Runtime Installer. In order to get this new installation, and again, it's separate from the IDE, we would log into the Appeon website, proceed to the User Center, select the download, select the overall Appeon installer for 2019 revision 3, run the main installer, select the runtimes that you want, and then just install them as needed. And then we just need to validate the runtimes. Notice that if you also try and uninstall a particular runtime, you'll now get a warning message that this particular runtime may be used in existing applications. Are you sure you want to proceed? So there's a safety check. So let's have a look at how the new installation process flow will go. Notice that I'm using the November 2nd beta version of revision number 3, which is build 2588 for this presentation. So launching your web browser and proceeding to the Appeon website at www.appeon.com, let's have a look at getting the actual download. Notice here in the menu, we now have the short link to download. So make sure that you're logged in at the website. Select the link Downloads. Then under the 2019 version, you should find PowerBuilder Installer 2019 Revision 3. But that will only occur when the product goes GA or General Availability. Currently now the product is in beta, so we'll proceed to the beta tab. Having a look at the beta tab, we'll select the Appeon installer for revision 3 beta, and then save the executable. So now that we've downloaded the actual Appeon overall installer, use the right-hand mouse button and run as administrator. So notice now it's going to fetch the files. It's going to have a look at your current installation environment within your machine. We're going to acknowledge the acceptance of the license agreement. And we can actually have a look at the different components that can be installed. So for now, for example, see that there's a PowerBuilder Runtime 2556 available. I've left that checked. And then I can use the command button at the bottom right-hand side to actually download this runtime. Notice that you can install the different PowerBuilder components, including the runtime, via the online route. I'm choosing the offline, so I'm going to download the actual installation itself. The setup.exe is a separate file. I like to do this because then I can put it on a file server and I can have my PowerBuilder application development team run the same installer from the file server. This may be more convenient for them and they don't have to wait for downloads. And also it may be more convenient when you put it on a server for updating the runtime for PowerClient and also production environments. So let's have a look at the actual install package. So drilling down into the subfolder, we can have a look here and see that we have the PowerBuilder runtime 2556, and we can actually execute autorun.exe in order to install it. I'm going to accept the terms of the agreement, and now we can install the actual PowerBuilder runtime when I hit the next button. And now you can see the actual setup.exe is installing the runtime on this particular machine. So once the runtime has been installed, let's verify if it's actually there and where it's located. So first of all, let's bring up the control panel. Let's do a search in the Runtime Application Features, have a look for runtime. And you can see here now that the PowerBuilder runtime for revision number 3 build 2556 has been installed. Opening up the regedit utility, we can have a look here at local machine software Sybase. We can see PowerBuilder. I'll do a refresh. After the refresh, you can see a new folder was created, PowerBuilder Runtime, and the runtime version itself, again, is 19.2.0.2556. So we've actually used the control panel now and the regedit utility to verify that the actual runtime install has been completed successfully. And notice that this is also where the actual IDE is going to locate what runtimes are installed on a particular machine. So post-installation validation. Go to the Microsoft Windows Control Panel, Application and Features, and search for Runtime, which you notice I already did, and I verified that the runtime was there. I open File Explorer and I can verify by navigating to Program Files, Appeon Now Common PowerBuilder, a new structure folder, that the runtime is there. I've also shown you how to run the regedit utility and verifying by going to now a 32-bit version of Windows will be local machine software WoW, which is Windows on Windows, Sybase PowerBuilder Runtime, or I was on a 64-bit version of Windows 10, so I went to local machine software Sybase, and then I saw the PowerBuilder Runtime folder. The PowerBuilder IDE will now use these registry settings to present runtime options to the PowerBuilder developer. And notice that the theme folder has now been renamed as well. Instead of theme NNN, it'll just be theme here. And there's a new location. So if you go to Program Files, x86, Appeon, PowerBuilder 19, which you saw before in earlier revisions of PowerBuilder 2019, there's a new subfolder called /IDE, and the new theme folder without the version number attached to it will be underneath that. So application migration changes. Open the Apps Workspace in the IDE. In the Revision 3 IDE, you can now set the runtime version via the system options. Allow the IDE to migrate the application, and notice that that may be optional, and then do a full build. Notice that if the application is less than build 2019, say for example you're coming from PowerBuilder 2017 or an earlier version of SAP Sybase PowerBuilder 12, 11, etc., you'll get a prompt to migrate. Otherwise, the migrate will not be there if you're going from 2019 R2 to 2019 R3. However, it will automatically, when you restart the IDE, ask you that there is a new version and then proceed to do the full build, which you need to do. Open the project object and then select Deploy. Notice that there will be a new XML file. The format of that is the application name that you've defined in the project for the executable with the suffix .xml. This XML file has the runtime path. In this example here, you can see a path to the runtime build 2588, which is what I'm using here in this particular presentation. If you select the runtime uninstall, you're going to get a new prompt. So here in the Windows 10 control panel, we're doing an uninstall, and notice the dialog pops up and says that if you continue to do this, You'll no longer be able to use that runtime, or applications that are already compiled with that may be affected. So let's have a look at the actual IDE and Runtime demo. For the IDE part of the demo, I've now switched to a second machine. I'm now also using build 2588. Let's have a look at the installed runtimes. Moving over here to File Explorer, we can have a look here in the Program Files Appeon Common PowerBuilder. There are actually now 3 runtimes installed, 2533, 56, and 2588. So the IDE can use any one of those runtimes. Let's have a look at the IDE now and see how that pans out. So you can see here in the IDE in the bottom right-hand corner, I'm using build 2588 for the IDE, but my runtime is set to 2556. I've also picked up the Easy Order demo application from the PowerBuilder Fundamentals course. This last generation was built in PowerBuilder 2019 revision number 2. Because it's not coming from an older version prior to 2019, you may want to use the right-hand mouse button and select Migrate. If the application is being moved forward from a lower version than 2019, you'll be prompted to migrate automatically. So now let's have a look at the Tools System Options dialog. Notice also the different format of the dialog, which is a lot easier to navigate through the common tab pages across the top. But we also have from the registry, we can see the IDE knows these 3 runtimes are installed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually move to which is the newest build 2588, which is from November 2nd, and select OK. Notice it prompts me the fact that we are switching runtime versions, so I need to restart the IDE at this point. So I'll hit OK, and I'm going to exit the IDE, and I'm going to restart it again. Here's another tip. Here's a shortcut to the PowerBuilder 2019 IDE. I'm going to go and have a look at the file location, which is the shortcut to start that. And if I look at the properties, you can see here under the compatibility tab that I've checked run this application as administrator. This is something that I like to do because sometimes certain aspects or certain features of PowerBuilder IDE you need to be running as administrator. After I install a new version of PowerBuilder, I always set the shortcut to run as administrator. And now we're logged in. Notice when we come back, on the bottom right-hand side, you can see the IDE is 2588, and the runtime has also been moved up to build 2588. And there's a prompt here saying that you need to do a build in order to make sure you've picked up the latest compiler logistics of that particular build. Notice whether you're going forward or you're going backward in a runtime, it'll always prompt you after you restart the IDE to do a build. I'll set OK here, and it'll actually go through the build process, and you can see it processing there along the bottom of the IDE. Now that the build has been done, it matches the build for the runtime that I've chosen, I can execute the application. We've actually started the application in its plain vanilla look and feel. I'm now going to take this opportunity to actually theme this and give it a more modern look. So I'm just going to hit cancel for a moment. So notice here if I go to the new path, which is Appeon PowerBuilder 19 and then the new IDE, you can see that there's a folder here called Theme. I'm going to use the right-hand mouse button and I'm going to select Copy. I'm now going to go to the Easy Order Application Workspace folder. So you notice now that the theme folder has been added to the working folder of the workspace for the Easy Order application. So once this is done, I'm going to open up the actual application object. I'm going to go to Additional Properties under the New Themes tab page, and I'm going to select a dark theme and hit OK. And then save this application object. And notice now that we have a new look and feel without actually doing any program changes. So let's continue to have a look at this application. So we'll enter the secret password, hit OK. And notice now that we have the ability here to actually do a search for customers, have a look at customer information, and do other types of activities. So the application works exactly the same as it did in the previous release, but we've modernized the user interface and we made sure that it runs with the new runtime. So what I'm going to do now is have a look at the project for this so I can build either a 32 or 64-bit executable. So I have projects already defined for that. And you can see here that I'm actually going to build a easyorder.exe application. And let's have a look here at the PowerBuilder external compiler options. Let's do a select all, and I'll do a copy. I'll bring it into Notepad here, and then you can see here what's been added here to the command line is that the runtime that I chose in the IDE has added a parameter /RT to the external compile directive and asked it to use the runtime 1920.2588 for the build. So that's a new parameter here. So let's go ahead here and use the right-hand mouse button and do a deploy. So returning back to the actual folder for the EasyOrder application where the workspace is, have a look at the new files that were generated. We can see the executable has been generated, but also the fact that there's a new file called easyorder.xml. So the executable name has been basically repeated with the suffix XML, and if we double click this, we can now see that this basically is the path to the runtime. Program files, Appeon Common, PowerBuilder Runtime, and again, using 19.2 build 2588. So now when I double click the executable, you can see here now that it picks up the new runtime, and because we themed it, we have a new look and feel. So everything works exactly the same as it did when we ran it from the IDE. So let's have a look at instantiated classes in memory. Some PowerBuilder applications access the PowerBuilder Runtime internal objects. And you can acquire access to that by using, for example, the Find Window SDK API and get the handle to those resources. Up to PowerBuilder 2019 revision number 2, object classes in memory were numbered, just like the DLLs. But unlike the PowerBuilder Runtime DLLs, which were PowerBuilder and then whatever the name is, for example, TRA for the tracing module, and then 170 or 190, those numerics have been dropped. So let's have a look also in memory. So in 2019 revision number 2, if you wanted to deal with the micro help bar, the class name for that in memory was fnhelp190. You can see it here by this actual memory search. However, starting in revision number 3, object classes in memory are not numbered. So if we did a memory search at this point, you'll see that the fix bar, which is the pointer to the MDI frame micro and menu toolbar, we also have a pointer to the micro help bar, but now it just says fnhelp, not fnhelp190. So this will continue in revision number 3 and forward. Notice that we actually found this memory information by running the Windows Explorer written in PowerBuilder. I wrote this, and you can download it from my SourceForge project in Projects, Software Tool and Die Foundation Classes, Files, Applications, PowerBuilder, and then Windows Explorer. And you can run this yourself to look all around the operating system, both PowerBuilder, non-PowerBuilder, and Windows operating system resources. So let's have a look at that XML file that was produced. Again, whatever name you give to the application executable, a new file is created .xml. Note that you should deploy that with your PowerBuilder executable as well. If not deployed with the application executable though, when you start the application executable, it'll look for the system path to see if there's a pointer to the actual PowerBuilder runtime to use. If you deploy the XML file with the executable, it points to where the executable should pick up the runtime. It could be in some kind of a common runtime area, for example, off a shared drive. Or, for example, the runtime files could be in the same folder as the application executable. In that case, you're going to modify the XML file in the runtime path, removing the actual start of the path, and just give a symbolic /runtime, 192.02588, for example. And it'll look for the runtime in the same folder as the executable. However, if you put it in a subfolder, which is a better way to organize things, then again, you just change the runtime path, except you're going to just put in /runtime, and then the runtime folder name that has the version and build that you want to use. Also, runtime related utilities. There's also a new environment variable in revision number 3. It's environment.runtimePath equals, and then you can give it the path to the runtime. So if you don't use the XML file, you can also use this environment variable. When you run the updated OrcaScript utility, there's a new parameter, which is runtime version. For example, here you can see running the OrcaScript compiler with the runtime version /d set to 19.2 build 2558. The new PowerBuilder external compiler, of course, has a /RT, and we've seen that already when I looked in the project object of the IDE. It added the /RT based on the system options setting for the runtime in the IDE. And the PowerBuilder Runtime Packager utility as well has the ability to actually point to the selected current runtime. So at Application Startup, when you start the IDE, there's a new Start menu option in revision number 3. So there's a new runtime link added to the R3 group in the Start menu. You can see it here on the right-hand side, PowerBuilder Runtime. When you select this link, it'll actually start the IDE, but it'll prompt you for the runtime, as opposed to starting the runtime and then having to go to the System Options dialog. You can do it all in one shot. So now let's go back to the demo machine. We're going to run again the Easy Order application demo. However, this time we're also going to include a little bit more, not only about the application, but also PowerClient. There are different modules to PowerClient. One of them is the PowerClient server. We're going to talk to this in more detail, of course, in the PowerClient session. However, here you can see in this example, the PowerBuilder developer has two applications. They're both using the base PowerBuilder 2019 revision number 3, and they've been deployed with the same runtime. And there's also a PowerClient piece that sits on the workstation that we'll talk about in the other presentation. However, again, maybe you picked up a new maintenance release for the runtime, and you also want to actually have PowerClient deploy not only the application, but it can also deploy the runtime as well. So we'll look at that aspect in the next part of the application demo as well. So again, that's just reinforcing the fact that a single instance of the IDE can maintain multiple runtimes. And when you're using the new PowerClient deployment feature, you can also deploy and maintain applications of different runtimes as well in the production environment on the workstation. And again, if you want to reverse that, if you remove it from PowerClient server, next time the user starts application number 2, the runtime will automatically be brought back to the base. That because you remove maintenance release number 1. Every time the application starts in this configuration, the PowerClient workstation will always contact the PowerClient server and determine whether the application and/or runtime needs to be updated or rolled back. So over on the PowerClient server machine, let's have a look at the actual File Explorer. Because my web server is IIS, in order to have a look at PowerClient, which is installed underneath that umbrella, let's have a look at inetpub, wwroot, scrolling down, PowerClient App Publisher, Runtime, and then you can see the different runtimes that I have installed, 2533, 56, and 88. Those, they correspond to the same drop-down information that we saw in the PowerBuilder IDE, in the System Options dialog when we're selecting the particular runtime to use. So going back to the PowerBuilder IDE, notice that if I select New, we have a new project called the PowerClient Client Server App. I can actually open it because I've already created one. Again, I'm not going to have a look at the details of this particular project except for the runtime aspect. If I go over to the project's runtime tab, you notice here that I can select the actual deployment pieces that I would like. So you can use the Select All to basically deploy the entire runtime and all the different feature support. Or you can uncheck it and then you check whatever aspects of the runtime you need. For example, I need the ODBC driver, and I may need, for example, some compression. I may need some support for JSON, and I can just check what I want, maybe Microsoft Excel. And then that will be the components that are deployed. Again, you can see using PowerBuilder version runtime 2588. Again, this is grayed out because it's set in the IDE's System Options dialog in the dropdown for the runtime. So once I set the actual runtime components that I need, I just point this particular project to my Easy Order application, and I'll deploy that to the PowerClient server on this particular machine. Again, it could be done on a separate machine, and we'll get into the details of that as we look at the PowerClient session later in the Elevate 2020 conference. So you can see at the bottom of the IDE, the actual deploy is going on. PowerClient project, it automatically does a full build for you, or an incremental build, depending on what changes you've made. You can't get away from that. It'll always want to do some type of minimal build in order to make sure it gets the latest, and then passes that information as a package that you can see here at the bottom over to the PowerClient server. So runtime installation and validation. Open File Explorer and verify by going to that address that I did already to make sure that the runtimes are there. Notice that the PowerClient feature in revision number 3 is available in both the Professional and Cloud Pro editions of PowerBuilder revision number 3. So we've seen actually now how it gets deployed to the PowerClient server. What happens here now on the PowerClient machine? That we need to be able to go over to a machine and see what happens when a business user runs the application and what the runtime looks like from the actual production workstation. So in this part of the application demo, I've actually moved over to the PowerClient workstation. So let's have a look at the workstation, the configuration of the application, and how it interacts with PowerServer as far as the runtime is concerned. So having a look here at the desktop, what happens here is when you actually want to use the application, the shortcut will be automatically built for you, or you can build it yourself. Let's have a look at the properties here. You'll notice here in the shortcut, what it's really doing is it's actually calling the PowerClient server, which is on my machine as the server SCD-Chris LT, and then I'm actually running the order entry application from there. So that URL sets things off to communicate from the workstation to the server. So if I double click the order entry link, it actually starts the application by, first of all, connecting to PowerServer client. It then checks to make sure that the application or the runtime has not been basically moved ahead to a maintenance release or rolled back. If so, it'll make those changes locally, and then it starts the actual application executable. You can see here that the theme that we set earlier in the native PowerBuilder application is carried through to the PowerClient application that's been deployed automatically by the PowerClient server to this workstation. Then you see the application starts. We have the new dark theme applied. We can actually search for customers. We can double click, and we see the information exactly the same as a PowerBuilder native client. Let's have a look under the hood though and see what's going on. So having a look here at the user part of the operating system, users, this application is running under a workstation underneath a user called Janet, application data, roaming, Appeon, PowerBuilder applications. So that's a new folder that you don't normally see up until revision number 3. Underneath that, applications, and now you have the runtime. And there we have the folder with build 2588. Underneath that, you'll notice that we have a whole bunch of zip files. Well, those zip files that were actually sent down to you really have the DLLs that we would normally see when we actually deploy them from the actual shared folder of the native PowerBuilder IDE machine. So when these zip files come down, they get decompressed, and then you can see the DLLs then sitting here also in this folder. So you see both of them here on a PowerClient workstation. Going back to applications, we'll have a look at the order entry application. We'll see here that there's also an XML file. So if I go here to view details, we can see the theme folder has also been deployed. We can see the executable, and we can see that XML file. So let's double click that and open the XML file. Notice here that the actual runtime path has been altered, however, during the deployment process. Instead of C program files 86, you now see that it's actually on the user's workstation under users, the user name that's logged in the window, app data roaming, Appeon, B apps, applications, and then the folder that we've already seen, which is runtime 19202588. So that XML file is automatically altered during the actual deployment process. So that's all there is to running an application on a workstation from PowerClient server. So let's look at a summary of this presentation, the decoupled runtime. It gives you a more flexible IDE and runtime version management for both, of course, Appeon engineering to be able to deliver those to you, and also for the PowerBuilder developer to manage their development environment and help assist with the production deployment of the runtime. The file storage structure of the installed product is organized more clearly from both the developer and the workstation point of view. So lots more runtime, distribution, and loading options are available. It's also now possible to switch runtimes for native client-server applications, both from the project object and also by editing that new XML file. It creates a more sustainable application development process for the long term for both Appeon engineering and, more importantly, the PowerBuilder developer. And switchable runtimes are also supported by PowerClient, as we've seen in the last demo. So notice you can join us at the Appeon Community at community.appeon.com, where there's lots more discussion, technical articles, videos, and free online training. Not only about PowerBuilder 2019 Revision 3, but also other releases of PowerBuilder, InfoMaker, and PowerServer. Also, we're also present on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Where YouTube, there's a lot more application videos as well on all Appeon products. I hope you've enjoyed watching the Decoupled Runtime and IDE presentation here at Elevate 2020. I hope some of my tips and techniques may also be useful when you get on to revision number 3 when it goes production or general availability. I hope you enjoy the rest of the Elevate 2020 conference. Thanks for watching.